1947, the Roswell Daily Record hits the stands. Headline: RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. Big news, right?
Huge news. I mean, imagine reading that, but then almost immediately, poof.
Exactly. The Army retracts, says, nope, just a weather balloon, move along.
And right there, that whiplash from flying saucer to weather balloon. That's the seed of the whole mystery, isn't it?
It really is. So today, here on the Deep Dive, we're diving into the Wikipedia entry on the Roswell incident.
Our mission basically is to unpack what happened or what we think happened.
Yeah.
The initial reports, that quick retraction, and then, well, decades of theories piling up.
Yeah, theories that get pretty wild and often contradict each other. We want to understand how this one event, out in the New Mexico desert became such a massive cultural thing.
And try to figure out how you separate fact from, well, everything else that's been layered on top over the years. It's a real challenge with a story this famous.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's go back to that summer of 47. Where does it start?
It starts with a rancher, W.W. Riddell. Everyone called him Mac. He's out on his ranch near Corona, New Mexico.
Right.
And sometime late June, maybe early July, he finds debris scattered over his land.
And the descriptions of this debris are key, aren't they? What did the sources say he found?
Yeah, the entry lists things like tinfoil, bits of rubber or some kind of tape, and even thin wooden beams or sticks.
Wooden beams. Okay, that sounds odd. Not exactly typical plane wreckage.
Not at all. And here's an important point. Brazell himself wasn't really plugged into the whole flying disc mania that was just starting.
Oh, right. The Kenneth Arnold sighting had just happened, hadn't it? Sparked a wave of reports.
Exactly, but Brazell, out on the ranch, he was kind of oblivious to all that national buzz initially. He didn't immediately think aliens.
So when did the flying disc idea connect for him?
It seems it was when he went into town around July 5th. He heard about the craze, heard about the $3,000 reward someone was offering for physical proof of a flying disc.
Ah, the reward. That probably got his attention.
You'd think so. So the next day, July 6th, he tells Sheriff George Wilcox in Roswell about what he found.
And the sheriff takes it seriously.
Apparently so. Wilcox contacts Roswell Army Airfield, or RAAF.
And RAAF, we should stress, wasn't just some small outpost. This was a critical base.
Absolutely critical. Home of the 509th Bomb Group, the only unit in the world at that time with nuclear weapons.
So anything unusual happening nearby, they'd jump on it?
No question. The base commander, Colonel Blanchard, sends out Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer, and another officer, Captain Cabot, to the ranch.
You check out the debris themselves. Marcel's name becomes really important later, doesn't it?
Extremely important. So they collect some of the material, and then comes July 8th.
The press release. Walter Hote, the base public information officer, puts out the statement saying RAAF had recovered a flying disc.
And it goes global. International headlines. For a moment, it seemed like definitive proof had landed.
But just
Like less than 24 hours. The Army steps in, retracts the whole thing. General Ramey holds a press conference.
showing debris.
Yeah, showing debris that they now say is just from a standard weather balloon. They even did a demonstration later showing reporters mundane weather balloon stuff.
That reversal feels abrupt. Suspicious, even.
It definitely fueled suspicion later on. And, much later, the Air Force actually admitted that the weather balloon story itself was a cover story.
A cover for a cover. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. What were they actually trying to hide then?
They said it was to deflect attention from a top-secret program called Project Mogul.
Project Mogul. Okay, what was that about?
Mogul was this highly classified Cold War project. They were using trains of high-altitude balloons equipped with microphones, basically trying to listen for sound waves from Soviet nuclear tests way up in the atmosphere.
High-altitude balloons with instruments. That sounds potentially consistent with strange debris.
It does. And crucially, the Air Force pointed to a specific Mogul launch, flight number 4, launched from Alamogordo on June 4th, 1947.
Just before Brazil found the debris.
Exactly. And they tracked it for a while, then lost contact. Its last known position was only about 17 miles from Brazil's ranch.
Wow. Okay, and the materials? Did they match?
Well, the descriptions of lightweight foil, the tape with symbols on it, which Mogul used, sourced from a toy company. Interestingly enough, the beams. A lot of it lined up with the construction of these Mogul balloon arrays. Much better than weather balloon, anyway.
So why not just say, oops, classified balloon crash back in 47. Why the weather balloon story first?
Secrecy. Mogul was incredibly top secret. Revealing its existence, even to explain some weird debris, could have compromised the whole intelligence gathering operation against the Soviets.
So the weather balloon was just easier, less damaging.
Probably seemed like the path of least resistance at the
Yeah.
time. Keep Mogul under wraps.
Okay, so that explanation, Project Mogul, seems to cover the initial event pretty well. But the story didn't die there, did it?
Not by a long shot. It went quiet for about 30 years, then roared back to life in the late
What
70s.
happened then?
1978. The key figure is Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who collected the debris back in 47. He gave an interview to a UFO researcher, Stanton Friedman.
And what did Marcel say after all those years?
He basically said the weather balloon story was bogus, a cover-up. But more than that, he claimed the material he handled felt otherworldly. Nothing made on this earth was a quote attributed to him later. He speculated it was extraterrestrial.
Wow, coming from the guy who was actually there handling the stuff, that's powerful.
It was incredibly powerful. That interview and the book that followed in 1980, the Roswell incident, really kicked off the modern Roswell phenomenon.
So Marcel's statement opened the floodgates for everything else.
Pretty much. The narrative started expanding rapidly. It went from weird debris to, claims of hidden alien bodies.
The classic gray alien.
Multiple crash sites, not just one. Alien autopsies performed in secret. Government cover-ups involving recovered spacecraft. Maybe even attempts to reverse engineer the technology.
Okay, hold on. Where did all that stuff come from? Was there any actual evidence for bodies and multiple crashes?
That's the crucial point the Wikipedia entry emphasizes. There's no credible, independent evidence supporting these expanded claims. They seem to have been woven in over time.
Woven in from where? Other stories.
It looks like it. There was an earlier, completely separate hoax in 1948 about a crashed saucer in Aztec, New Mexico.
Aztec. I've heard of that one.
Yeah, promoted by a columnist named Frank Scully, based on claims from con artists. That story already had elements like small humanoid bodies, weird metals, a government cover-up.
So elements from the debunked Aztec story kind of got grafted onto Roswell later on.
It seems that way. When Roswell resurfaced, those more sensational elements, maybe influenced by the Aztec tale and other bits of UFO lore floating around, got attached to it. The gray alien image itself was becoming more common by then, too.
Fascinating how stories can merge and borrow. What about Hangar 18? That always gets mentioned with Roswell.
All right, Hangar 18, this mythical place where they supposedly keep the alien craft and bodies, often linked to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Was that originally part of the Roswell story?
Not really. It kind of predates the Roswell resurgence, tied more to Aztec and general rumors. The Air Force has always denied any such hangar exists.
But didn't a movie link them?
Yes, the 1980 film Hangar 18. The director explicitly said it was a modern-day dramatization of Roswell. That really cemented the connection in popular culture, even if the origins were separate.
It's like a convergence of different myths. Let's go back to Marcel's specific claims. He mentioned strange properties, right? Like foil that wouldn't stay crumpled?
Yes, that was a key part of his account, this lightweight foil that, when crumpled, would supposedly spring back into shape.
And his son mentioned something too.
His son, Jesse Marcel Jr., years later, described seeing debris his father brought home that had symbols on it like purple-hued hieroglyphics.
Alien writing.
Well, researchers later connected those descriptions to the symbols found on the special adhesive tape used in constructing the Project Mogul balloons. That tape came from a toy company.
So maybe not alien hieroglyphs after all. What about the 1980 book, The Roswell Incident? Did it add more layers?
Oh, a hugely influential book by Berlitz and Moore. It amplified Marcel's story, but also introduced this whole other element.
Yeah.
Alien bodies found far away on the plains of San Agustin.
Wait, bodies. Where did that come from? Marcel never mentioned bodies, did he?
No, Marcel himself never claimed to see bodies. This story was attributed secondhand to a deceased engineer named Barney Barnett. The book also suggested the craft was observing nuclear activity and got hit by lightning.
Okay, so now we have bodies, a crash cause,
Yeah.
a lot added on. And the book suggested the photos of Marcel with the debris were faked.
It suggested the debris in the photos was swapped out for actual weather balloon bits, yeah. Though visually there's no obvious sign of a swap in the photos themselves.
This is getting complex. Then there was Majestic 12, MJ12. That sounds very conspiracy theory-ish.
It absolutely was. Starting in the early 80s, these supposedly leaked, top-secret government documents surfaced.
Leaked by who?
Anonymously, often sent to UFO researchers, including Bill Moore, one of the authors of the Roswell incident.
And what did these documents claim?
They described a super-secret committee, Majestic 12, supposedly formed by President Truman to handle the Roswell crash, the alien bodies, the technology, everything.
Sounds like the ultimate proof, if real.
If real. but they've been pretty thoroughly debunked. Investigators found stylistic inconsistencies, formatting errors, typewriter mismatches, things that suggested they were fakes.
Fakes? Who would fake something like that?
Well, Bill Moore himself later admitted he'd helped circulate some disinformation, possibly fed to him, maybe hoping it would lead him to real classified info. It really muddied the waters. The MJ-12 documents also had their own version of Roswell, with bodies ejected before impact.
So deliberate fakes mixed in with the evolving stories. What about Glenn Dennis? He claimed to have first-hand knowledge of bodies, didn't he?
He did. Glenn Dennis was a mortician in Roswell. He came forward in 1989.
What did he say?
He claimed he got calls from the airbase back in '47 asking about small, hermetically sealed caskets and how to preserve bodies that had been exposed to the elements.
Okay.
And he also claimed a nurse he knew, who worked at the base hospital, told him in confidence that she'd seen strange, small bodies and witnessed part of an autopsy.
A nurse eyewitness. That sounds significant.
It did, and Dennis became a key witness for many believers. However, his story ran into trouble.
How so?
Major inconsistencies over time. And crucially, the nurse. He gave names for her, but investigators couldn't find any record of a nurse matching those names or descriptions ever working there.
So he couldn't prove she existed.
Right. He later admitted he'd used false names. Many researchers, even within ufology, now view his account, especially the parts about alien bodies, as unreliable or fabricated.
So by the early 90s, wow, the whole Roswell story seems like a tangled mess of conflicting accounts.
Completely. You had different researchers and authors championing totally different versions. Was it one crash site? 2. Were there bodies? How many? Where were they found?
Different books pushing different narratives.
Exactly. Books like UFO Crash at Roswell, Crash at Corona, The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. They couldn't even agree on the basic sequence of events or locations anymore. There was a real schism in the UFO community over it.
Okay, so with all this confusion and, frankly, increasingly wild claims swirling around, the government, the Air Force, finally decided to step in again, right? Mid-90s.
Yes, there was pressure, partly from Congressman Stephen Schiff from New Mexico demanding answers. The GAO, the General Accounting Office, also got involved.
And what did the Air Force report say this time?
The first big one, in 1994, essentially confirmed what they'd hinted at before. Yes, the weather balloon story was a cover. The debris was from Project Mogul.
So they officially owned up to Mogul being the source of the 47 debris.
They did. And a follow-up report in 1995, Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico desert, went into much more detail, linking the debris specifically to that Mogul Flight Number 4 from June 47, showing how the flight path matched up with Brazil's ranch.
Okay, that covers the debris pretty thoroughly. But what about the bodies? All those later stories about aliens, did they address that?
They did, in a 1997 report called the Roswell Report. Case closed.
Case closed. Sounds definitive. What was their explanation for the body claims?
They argued that these accounts, which mostly surfaced decades later, were likely confused memories or misinterpretations of other events. Specifically, they pointed to military activities involving anthropomorphic dummies.
Dummies, like crash test dummies.
Sort of. These were used in high-altitude parachute drop tests conducted in the New Mexico desert during the 1950s after the 1947 incident.
And how would dummies be mistaken for aliens?
The Air Force report described how these dummies were recovered, sometimes using stretchers, sometimes placed in insulation bags that might look like body bags. They were transported on vehicles described as weapons carriers.
Okay, I can see how that might look strange out of context.
Right. And the dummies themselves were bald, sometimes described as looking like plastic dolls, often wearing flight suits. The Air Force suggested that witness memories of these dummy recovery operations in the 50s might have become conflated over time with the 1947 Roswell debris story.
So, Mogul for the debris in 47, and confused memories of dummy drops in the 50s for the later body stories. That's the official explanation.
That's the comprehensive explanation the Air Force put forward. Plausible, detailed. But it didn't stop the theories.
No, I suppose not. The alien narrative was probably too embedded by then. What came after the Air Force reports? More hoaxes.
Definitely. The mid-90s also saw the infamous alien autopsy film.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Black and white footage supposedly showing doctors dissecting an alien from Roswell.
Exactly. It caused a massive sensation. Looked convincing to many, but completely fake.
Yeah.
The creator, Ray Santilli, admitted years later it was a staged reconstruction filmed in London. But it certainly fueled the public imagination for a while.
Wild. Any other major claims around that time?
Philip J. Corso's 1997 book, The Day After Roswell, Corso was a former Army officer.
And his claim?
He claimed he'd personally seen a non-human body from Roswell back in the day, and, more dramatically, that he'd overseen efforts to seed alien technology recovered from the crash into American industry. Reverse engineering, basically.
Whoa, that's a big claim. Was it credible?
It faced a lot of criticism. Factual errors about military bases and protocols, inconsistencies. Even Senator Strom Thurmond, who wrote the foreword, asked for it to be removed later due to concerns about its accuracy.
So another sensational story that didn't quite hold up under scrutiny. It seems like Roswell just attracts these things.
It really does. It's become this magnet for fringe ideas, like Annie Jacobson's theory in 2011 involving, get this, Joseph Mengele and surgically altered children created for Stalin to cause panic in the U.S.
Seriously, that sounds beyond far-fetched.
It was widely panned by scientists and historians. Lack of evidence, factual errors. Then you had the alien slides in 2017.
Slides, what were they supposed to show?
Initially claimed to be leaked photos of a Roswell alien body. Turned out to be photos of a mummified Native American child from a museum.
Oh, wow. That's just sad.
Yeah, and even recently, a declassified report mentioned Roswell personnel working in bulky, ill-fitting radioactive suits after a 1950s atomic test, suggesting maybe that could have been mistaken for aliens by someone who didn't know what was going on.
It's like almost any unusual event in the area gets potentially folded into the Roswell mythos.
That's a good way to put it. And looking at Roswell as a modern myth helps explain that.
How so? How does viewing it as a myth help?
Well, myths evolve, right?
Yes.
They incorporate new elements, reflect societal anxiety. Sociologists point out that the Roswell story, especially the cover-up narrative, really took off during periods of increased public distrust in government post-Vietnam, Watergate era, Cold War paranoia.
So the story tapped into existing feelings.
Exactly. And the UFO community, the storytellers, they played a huge role in shaping it, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, maybe emphasizing accounts that fit the alien narrative and downplaying or discrediting evidence like the Mogul explanation. That didn't.
You can really see that evolution in the different versions of the story over time.
Absolutely. The Wikipedia entry has a table summarizing it from just debris in 47 to Marcel's 78 claims, then adding bodies, different crash sites. It just gets more and more elaborate and often contradictory.
And the cultural impact is just massive. Roswell is practically synonymous with UFOs now.
Undeniable. The town of Roswell itself has leaned into it completely.
The UFO tourism thing.
Oh yeah. Alien-themed motels, diners, gift shops. The International UFO Museum and Research Center, they have an annual UFO festival that apparently draws close to 90,000 people. It's huge for the local economy.
And in movies, TV, it's everywhere.
Everywhere. Hangar 18, Independence Day, Indiana Jones even references it. The X-Files, the show Roswell, and it's become this cultural touchstone.
A shorthand for aliens and government secrets.
Exactly. It taps into themes of, the unknown, distrust of authority, our place in the universe. Even U.S. presidents get asked about it. Clinton, Obama, Trump. They've all fielded questions about whether they've seen the Roswell files.
Which kind of shows how deeply ingrained it is in our collective imagination. Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. After diving into all this, what are the main takeaways?
Well, the core event seems pretty clearly traceable to debris from a top-secret Project Mogul balloon. That's takeaway one.
Takeaway 2.
The initial cover stories, the weather balloon, and the general secrecy around military projects created an information vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum.
So conspiracy theories rushed in to fill the gap.
Pretty much. Fueled by Marcel's later claims, existing UFO beliefs, maybe some Cold War anxiety. The story grew and morphed over decades. Alien bodies, multiple crashes, cover-ups, none supported by solid evidence, often relying on anecdotes, speculation, or outright hoaxes.
And the official explanations, like Mogul and the dummy drops, while plausible, haven't been enough to dislodge the more sensational versions for many people.
Exactly. The alien narrative is just more compelling, perhaps.
So the final thought for our listeners to chew on.
Maybe consider this. How easily can secrecy, even if initially well-intentioned, spiral out of control and create something far stranger than the original truth? Roswell shows our fascination with the unknown, our complex relationship with authority, and maybe, a deep-seated human hope or fear that we're not alone. What does the enduring power of the Roswell myth, despite all the debunking, really tell us about our own need for extraordinary stories in an often ordinary world?